Hello, my people. Welcome back to another episode of Unlearn with Bianca. If you are new here, then welcome. We are getting straight into it today, my friends. I wanted to do an episode on something that frequently comes up in conversation with my clients, an observation or idea that I thought would really benefit you, especially if you are moving through recovery, if you're interested in what it takes to stay well. In today's episode, we're answering the question, is there such thing as a chronic illness personality? Based on all of the people that I have seen get their health back, based on my own journey, based on everything I know, do I think that there are certain personality types that are more prone to having chronic symptoms? First, I'm going to share with you guys a social media TikTok reel that I put up a few weeks ago that gained a lot of traction, that had a lot of people commenting and agreeing. And I'm doing this for a reason, because we're going to circle back at the end, and this all ties into everything that I'm going to be talking about today. This thing that I'm about to share, I've actually transcribed it, because when I got on TikTok and did it, I just did it on the fly, and I really want to say exactly what I said because I really think it hits a certain point. So I said that I've got this theory around people that develop chronic health issues, pain, fatigue, IBS, anxiety, and that kind of thing. I work with these people a lot, and if there's one thing I've learned, these people are highly intelligent. I would go as far to say that their bodies are so on their side and so in tune that they're getting warning signs in the form of chronic symptoms that most people do not get. And I do say this because a lot of people are under a lot of chronic stress, but their bodies aren't giving them signs. They have no idea because they're not getting the warning signs. And then years later, for these people, out of the blue, there might be a big cataclysmic health event. So that could be a heart attack out of nowhere. It could be a cancer diagnosis. People with chronic symptoms, their bodies are not waiting. This is true, guys. In fact, I would go further to say that their bodies are speeding up the process for them to step into the next version of themselves, the next evolution of themselves, so that they don't get that big thing happen. Now, they've got big lives to live. They might not even be in their purpose yet, and they don't know it. But their body is saying to them, well, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to look after me, if you're not going to slow down, I am going to ramp these symptoms up. I'm going to accelerate these symptoms until you start listening, until you start treating me different, until you start thinking differently, until you start to deal with stress differently, deal with emotions differently, get rid of those certain people in your life. What if the body is actually saying, let me expedite this process so that you don't waste years of your life doing the same thing when you've got bigger things to do? So there's one thing I truly believe, and that sometimes the body's got to do what it's got to do to get you back onto your highest path. And when you see chronic symptoms as an opportunity to look at your life and to do things differently, you move through it. You take the wisdom from that experience, and you would be surprised, because life can be so much greater. You can be so much more happier. You can be so much more you through the experience. And that is what I see time and time again. Okay, so that's what I said on social media. That's the point I made. I want you to let that land, and we're going to come back to that at the very end, because there's things I want to link in around today's conversation. And hopefully, just by listening to that, some of you can start to see illness or symptoms as a potential opportunity. So today's conversation is about the quote-unquote chronic illness personality. Now, this idea has actually been more and more popular in recent years. You may have heard of Gabor Mate talk about a certain type of personality that tends to get sick. There's certain other neuroscientists talking about it. I personally refrain from making this connection between chronic illness and personality, because if we see it as a personality and an identity, then there is zero room for someone to change that. However, I do see that there are people that develop chronic symptoms that tend to have tendencies and strategies that they're really well versed at, at play. There's another word for this, and we can call it a part that is at play. I will do a whole separate episode on parts. It's a part of you, not the whole you, a part of you that comes in when you didn't have the resource to deal with something. So you learn a strategy to get through. So I'm not going to sit here and say there are certain distinct personality types, but what I will say, and what I do know for sure, is that there are certain tendencies and people that have certain parts that are really loud that tend to correlate to more stress on the system, and then eventually that can lead to illness. Now, I want to share with you 3 tendencies, 3 patterns, we could call them, that I see frequently in my clients, and most definitely have been there myself. And in fact, I would have called myself a triple threat. I had a full house. And as you're listening to this, I just want you to let it land. I want you to take what resonates. I want you to consider if any of these patterns resonate for you. And it's not that there's anything inherently bad with what I'm talking about today, but the 3 strategies, patterns, they tend to drive a stress response in the body. And they tend to, if we're really good at doing these things consistently, they tend to make us ignore our body and our body's cues. If we get stuck in these patterns for long enough without having the awareness that this is happening, then that can eventually lead to burnout or illness. Okay. So in 2026, we want to become a certified pattern recognizer. That is what we want to be doing. The more we can recognize patterns and strategies that have once worked for us that no longer do, that are not serving us or our nervous system, the more we can do something about it. The first one, all right, let's get into it. The first one is a classic that many of you will relate to. It is perfectionism. A lot of people who come with chronic symptoms have this tendency to be really good at perfectionism. And I say really good because it's obviously like a skill they've really honed in on to the point that they're doing it at the extreme end of the scale. And it's costing them a lot of time and a lot of energy. So what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is essentially, it's when you're consistently raising the bar on yourself. It's that mindset of I'll be happy when I know I've done this, but then you keep raising the bar on yourself when you get close, or I'll be done when I've done this to such a good degree, but then you keep raising the bar. So you're always feeling like you've never done enough. You set these impossible high standards for yourself and sometimes for other people. You are constantly critiquing your own performance, and it's that internal dialogue of it's never good enough. And you feel anxious and restless when things aren't perfect. So for people that are really good at running perfectionism, somewhere along the way, this part came in to protect them, and they learnt this belief that if I do things perfectly, people won't see my flaws. That's what it really comes down to. Like underneath it all, perfectionism isn't about being perfect. It's about trying to control how you're seen so that you don't have to feel the discomfort of being judged, of being criticized, or not feeling enough. An example could be this pressure that you put on yourself to have the house really tidy and clean and all in order before a close friend comes around, when you would never actually expect that of the other person. Like if you went to someone else's house and they had a few things out of place, or they had washing sitting there to be folded, you wouldn't judge them, but you're judging yourself. Another example, a relatable one, could be when you're spending hours trying to tweak that final tiny little detail on a project or on an email, even though it's actually enough. What you've done is already enough. It's fine. Perfectionism has our brain focus in on details at the cost of personal comfort and rest. And this is where we get in trouble. So it's the over preparing, it's trying to get everything right. It's the putting up the perfect photos on social media, making sure that you don't be perceived by looking anything less than flawless, right? It's unsustainable. It's not even real. So this is where we get into a bit of a pressure loop, really. Another form of perfectionism, which the woman will relate to, is this good girl conditioning. That really keeps us in shackles because we are taught to be a certain way and behave a certain way and respond a certain way. And that blocks us from expressing our true feelings. So when you learn to shine and you learn to own all of your feelings and you learn to be yourself fully and express yourself, you are letting go of a huge amount of internal pressure and stress on the nervous system, which is beneficial for your health. So let's make this tangible. How does perfectionism actually create stress, which then leads to illness? Like, what is the correlation? When that perfectionist part is running the show, it's not just doing a lot, it's trying to do everything to a high standard. So, what actually happens, and what I've learned having had to retrain that perfectionist part in me, is things end up taking longer. You take on more than you have capacity for. You're expecting everything to be done at this high standard, and then there's no room for recovery. So this creates this chronic overwhelm. You know, when there's so many tabs open and you're trying to do everything at this high standard, then it feels like you've got no time for anything at all. When you get into that state of overwhelm, which is essentially a freeze response, your body's like, there's too much going on. I can't do it all. I can't do it all to the standard. And therefore, it is creating stress on the nervous system. Not only that, but there's a lot of self-critiquing that goes with perfectionism. It's this constant inner criticism of that wasn't good enough. I need to do better. They're going to judge me. What if they find out? What if they find out I'm not good at this? And remember, because your brain doesn't actually know the difference between someone attacking you versus you attacking yourself, if you've gotten into that habit of criticizing yourself day in, day out, during all those small tasks, the brain signals to the body, this is a threat. So let's switch on the stress response. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, if you're resonating with this, I would say don't judge yourself, because none of these things, as I said at the start, are inherently bad. It's more about questioning in the moment, is this useful right now? Or is this not useful towards getting me towards the life I love? And what I mean by that is that for some people, in some instances, that level of intricacy and perfection is actually a really good thing. For example, if you're an architect, then there needs to be that level of high caliber. There needs to be a level of intricacy and detail. There'll be a point where that's useful, absolutely. But then 2 hours into a task where you're still focusing on that tiny detail, maybe, I'm not an architect, but maybe that might not be at that point useful for your mindset and your health. So it's this distinction we can start to develop over time. So back to questions that you might want to pose to yourself and ask yourself so that you can start creating this choice point, which is the most important thing when we're trying to unlearn automatic behaviors. The first one I usually go to is what actually matters right now. Because sometimes I find myself honing in on something and then I step back and I'm like, actually, this doesn't matter. My energy is precious, and actually, why am I putting my energy into this, focusing on this tiny thing when it actually doesn't matter right now? Another question that is really good at pulling us out of this pattern is, who am I trying to impress in this moment? Because if we really step back and consider that, chances are you're either trying to impress a stranger who really, why would you be trying to impress them? Or you're putting way too much energy into how you're being perceived by someone who probably won't even notice. And one more question is, where am I doing enough? In this moment, where am I doing enough? And that gets our brain's filter system to start looking at what is going well rather than what hasn't yet been completed to a high standard. So you can just start to ask yourself these questions when you find yourself putting all of your energy into those things that you know take a lot of time and a lot of your energy. The other thing I find really useful when I'm looping into those patterns of perfectionism is I just catch it, I notice it. Oh, I'm starting to pick my body apart, or oh, I'm starting to spend way too much time on that tiny detail that no one gives a shit about. I catch it. I then take a few breaths. Deep breath in. I let go of my shoulders. I let go of my stomach. And I release my jaw. And that right there is a simple safety cue I send to my nervous system. We're not running old patterns. We're safe in the present. And I just take that time before I get back to what I was doing. Because from that place, I'm going back into whatever I was doing from a regulated place. And 9 times out of 10, the pressure, internal pressure, has lessened. And if you do that time and time again, this is how we start reshaping nervous system responses. This is how we start retraining the brain. And we just start showing up differently. Okay, so number 2, the second thing that I see as having a correlation to chronic symptoms is this pattern or strategy of high achieving. High achieving itself isn't the problem. It's when it's driven by pressure instead of choice. When your worth gets tied to what you do, your nervous system never gets to switch off. I'm going to say that again. When your worth gets tied to what you do or what you produce, your nervous system never gets time to switch off. Now, I'll tell you one thing that I've learned from working with a lot of people. As I actually said at the start of this podcast, the people that I see who are stuck, they are really intelligent people. They have really high functioning neurological centers, because to get really stuck, you have to be quite a thinker. You have to be switched on. You have to learn quickly. So the people that I see that are often stuck in their health, yes, they might be stuck in their health, but they're also experts at whatever they choose to do in their personal life, in their life. So they learn things really quickly and they operate at a high level. Like, I always laugh, people in New Zealand, especially the South Island, will probably only be the ones to get this, but I've seen an abnormal amount of people that have done the coast to coast, or they've done like full marathons. I see people that push their bodies. I see people that set huge goals. I see people that are like, I've seen Olympians. I've seen people that are experts in their field. And this goes back to this achieving thing. Thinkers, high achievers, the people that get shit done. It can look like strength on the outside, but often it's coming from a place of pressure on the inside. So this part that is constantly looking to achieve, or the strategy of high achieving, it's afraid of failing. There is this fear of disappointing others or yourself or losing control. And sometimes it could be that when you're pushing to achieve a goal, you do want recognition from other people, but often it's self driven. It's this drive to achieve and to produce, and it's really fixated on output. So the mentality and the thoughts around this are, I have to keep going or I'll fall behind. I have to keep going because they'll be ahead. I have to keep going because I said I was going to do it and I'm going to do it. And of course, we can see that as a positive thing. Like, there are so many positives in someone who sets goals and achieves them. It shows drive, it shows determination. But as I said for the last point, there is a scale of when that becomes useful and then when that becomes no longer useful, to the point that it's driving a stress response in your body. So let's ground into like what that actually looks like, how you can actually identify if you're getting into this high achieving strategy. So first of all, it's just filling your calendar, completely filling your calendar with so many different things, trying to stay up to date with everything and to do it all. That mentality of like, I'll just fit one more thing in. It can also be something that's really common, is measuring your worth through productivity. So you might have learned at a young age that if you were productive, if you were achieving, then you were validated for that. So naturally, you're someone who gets their self-worth, which is ideally we'd want that internally. You're actually getting it from achieving or doing well at work, let's say, or doing well at a sport. Sometimes that achieving part can really ramp up and become no longer useful if you're always looking to one up somebody else. So that competitiveness, that constantly one step ahead, I'm going to do better than them. I can see from a mile away the people that have a really strong achiever part when they turn everything into a goal. Everything needs to be a goal, and they really allow themselves to just be. They're constantly in this state of what's next, like what's the next thing, what can I do next, but really feeling present and okay to relax in the moment. And that creates a lot of stress over time. And actually, one other thing I see a lot is underneath this high achieving part, there's often an avoider. Because when you're constantly doing, when you're constantly achieving or solving or hitting your goals, that's a really good way to not have to feel what's actually going on beneath that. So sometimes we stay busy not because we need to, but because slowing down would mean that we'd have to feel something that we've actually been avoiding. So that can be another reason why people get really good at achieving. So how does this achieving pattern relate to illness? One thing I've definitely noticed with my clients who have chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue is that they have definitely been good at achieving. And I can see from a nervous system perspective that if we've been in fight or flight for so long and we've missed all of those cues and we've been operating at that sympathetic dominance or fight or flight state, eventually our body goes into conserve energy and it goes into more of a shutdown state. And that is when we're burnt out, we have fatigue, we feel numb often from overdoing. So yeah, achieving, and again, not just achieving once, achieving with no rest, no calm down, no time to be present, doing that over a long period of time, letting that strategy take the lead, letting that part take over, that can create huge amounts of stress on the nervous system because we're in this constant doing state, which means constant activation of our stress response. Remembering that the stress response also turns on all the stress hormones like cortisol. So there's no safety when we're always doing. Our bodies are not designed to be having goal after goal after goal with no rest. Not only that, there is this internal voice, which is a perpetual cycle because you do more, but then you feel like that's not enough. So you criticize yourself, and then that causes you stress, and then you do more again. So it's this cycle of I need to do more, I need to push myself harder, I need to achieve more. So for this one specifically, I think a lot of it comes down to missing your body's cues for rest and presence and not having enough self-compassion. That's part of it as well. So if you are somebody who tends to set goals, that's an amazing thing. If you feel like it's getting to the point where it's too much in one direction, I encourage you, when you want to put your foot on the accelerator and you want to push forth and achieve and be productive, I encourage you to ask these questions to yourself. Is this urgency real or is it self-created? Because the thing is, you're still going to get the task done, but do you need to do it in that urgent way? Another question to ask is, am I trying to prove something right now? It's just a nice question to decide. Is what I'm doing coming from my own goal, or is it more based on trying to keep up with other people? Which is the idea of what is driving this pressure right now. Another question, am I trying to get ahead or avoid something to stay in control? I know that's a confronting one, but sometimes we need to ask the confronting questions. And finally, the last one, remember you can go over these and write these down if you pause this podcast. Would I talk to my friend like this? So when you're pushing, expecting yourself to do more and more and more to set that new goal, would I expect that of my friend, or would I talk to my friend like this? Because sometimes we just need that reminder that the pressure we put on ourselves to produce is not the pressure we put on anyone else. So why are we doing it to ourselves? Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about today, the last pattern that I see relates to chronic illness, is the chronic giver, the people pleaser, the empath, the over empath. This is the part that is constantly looking outward and tuning into everyone else's needs. So much so that if you're really well versed and really good at doing this, you forget your own needs. And it can be a habitual thing, or it can be something that you've become really good at from a really young age, having to manage everyone else's emotional state. This part and this strategy can show up really beautifully as care and compassion and generosity and responsibility. but it can come with a hidden cost for your health. It pops up in those moments when your body is screaming at you to say how you feel, but on the surface, you're like, you know what? I can't be bothered to rocking the boat. I feel like my voice is never heard. It's not even worth the effort. Yet internally, you're angry, you're resentful, you're frustrated. What's going on internally and what's coming out of your mouth is very disjointed. So that creates a lot of tension in the nervous system. It's when you say yes to requests, even though you're always exhausted because it's too hard to let the other person down. It's prioritizing other people's feelings over your own, or feeling responsible for other people's happiness. Over empathizing, taking on other people's emotions as if they were your own, and struggling to detach from what is theirs versus what is yours, and struggling to set boundaries because maybe you were never taught, or it feels selfish, or you know that you're going to be met with some kind of resistance. So these are all ways that this over giving pattern, over empathizing pattern can come out to the point that it becomes no longer useful. Of course, it's a beautiful thing in some instances when we have the capacity, but when we are stretching ourselves emotionally consistently over time, the thing is that if you're good at any of these patterns, then they're going to feel quite natural to you. That's where it's really important we start to recognize where we're feeling depleted, because it's like that's our body giving us cues. I wish I had been told that it was not my responsibility to read the room or to anticipate somebody else's needs. Even if I could see that potentially someone wasn't feeling great about something or they needed help, it's also partly their responsibility to ask. For those people that are resonating with this one, you need to stop over apologizing for simply existing and putting your needs in the picture, because there's only so much your body can take. And I'm really, really passionate, especially about this pattern here, because I see the most beautiful people that have done this for years and years and years, and it finally gets to the point where their body is just saying no more. I can't take any more. And I have empathy, because it is really hard to shift these dynamics, especially when it comes to boundaries with other people and speaking our truth. But I promise you, when you start doing it, it does become easier and your body will thank you. So how does this actually impact our health? Well, we're learning more and more. Neuroscientists are learning this. This has been studied. Trauma experts have told us when you're not processing anger and resentment and you're letting it fester internally, that is going to activate your nervous system, keep you in hypervigilance. It's storing old energy in your body that eventually can turn to illness. Your body is saying no again, but what's coming out is different. You're agreeing to keep the peace, but internally, these unprocessed emotions. When you do everything for everyone else, yet you don't even put yourself in the picture because you think, I haven't got enough time for that, I haven't got enough energy for that, you are betraying yourself. And your body, if it's not taken care of, if it doesn't get enough sleep, if it doesn't get talked to nicely, if it doesn't get an opportunity to rest, it is going to start speaking. People that are really good at giving, they spend so much of their time outwards that their body is often having little aches and pains and they don't stop, they push through. So if this is you, no shade, no judgment. It's all right. I still work through this from time to time myself. I don't have to deal with illness anymore, but I used to be the classic, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so I'll sit on the fence and I won't have an opinion, or I don't want to rock the boat in some instances. So what I want you to do is, number one, do a boundary check. When you go into automated behavior, I want you to check, is this actually mine to take on? It could be a task that you've been asked to do, or it could be emotionally. Is this actually mine to take on? Or am I saying yes out of habit and guilt, or a choice? If someone asks you to be there or do something, take a pause before you make that decision and check in with yourself. Do I have the capacity to do this right now? Take a breath, soften your shoulders, feel your feet on the ground, and just do that check in before you respond habitually. I'm often asking myself, is this my responsibility to fix? again, take that bird's eye view. Is this mine to fix? And when someone asks you a question and you want to just say the thing to keep the peace because you don't have the energy, I want you to check in. Am I responding from my truth? Is this truly how I feel? Because remember, when we're being incongruent, which means that one thing is not lining up with the other thing, what we say is not lining up with how we feel, that creates tension in the nervous system. We all know that because, actually, a good way to describe it is when you've wanted to cry and perhaps it hasn't been the right situation, you've been out in public and you get that lump in your throat. It's a very easy and distinct way to show that when we're holding in emotions and holding in how we feel, that's okay doing that once or twice. But when we feel like we need to do that consistently, that is what drives illness. Okay, guys, so just to recap, we have got the part or the strategy of perfectionism, the part strategy of high achieving, and then we've got people pleasing, over giving, and over empathizing is that last one. All three of these can, over time, doing them consistently, create stress on the nervous system, keep you in a long-term stress response, which then can drive and create illness. Essentially, the mind is running in one way, but the body is signaling another. And if those signals are ignored long enough, the body shows up as sick. The body will start giving you signs, okay? Now, I want to loop us all the way back to the start because I said all of that for a reason at the start. The thing I posted on social media that resonated with so many people. I said quite clearly in that post that sometimes when our body is giving us signals, it's easy to become resentful and frustrated. Why am I dealing with this illness? Why is this pain or fatigue coming up? Maybe, just maybe, that is your body's cue to show you that you need to do something different, to show you that you've actually got way more to be doing here. You've got way more opportunities coming your way. You've got a way better and more fulfilling life to live, but I'm going to expedite this process so that you can start changing. And because you're not listening, I'm going to ramp up the symptoms. So when it comes to these patterns, this is what I've learned. The more you can recognize where these patterns are showing up in an unhealthy way, because remember, they're not inherently bad. When it becomes too extreme, there is an opportunity to make a new choice. When we consistently make new choices, and you can get support on this is what I do with my clients. When you consistently make new choices, you start to reshape your nervous system responses and take stress off the system. Not only that, but you learn more self-compassion. You start to retrain the brain in a different direction. So when we show up to life differently, that does have an impact on whether or not we move through illness. And if I look back at where I started, where I was in my teenage years, and I was a triple threat at all of these different patterns. If I look back now, I mean, yeah, they all come up from time to time, but it's not my identity. That is probably half the reason why I keep really well today physically. I want you to really sit with that. There is an opportunity always with illness to change, not only get your health back, that's the cherry on top, but to change a lot of these patterns that have just been habitually running under the surface. So many people put so much energy into thinking, I just want to go back to how things were. I want to get back to the old me when I didn't have these health issues to deal with. Well, I promise you that when you do recover, when you are at the other side, you will be an even better version, an even more fulfilled version. So that is us for today, my friends. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you are leaving this episode thinking a little bit differently. As always, you're welcome to send me questions. You can do that through email. You can actually leave a comment on Spotify, or you can message me on Instagram. Thank you for tuning in and listening and being here. I hope you have a stunning week ahead, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.